All right, I think let's get started. So welcome everybody today. Thank you so much for joining us to celebrate both our 20th birthday at Cicada Innovations, but also the launch of this report, Australia's Deep Tech Future. My name is Sally Ann Williams and I'm the CEO of Cicada Innovations, and that is not a green screen behind me or a Zoom background, but this is actually our building here right next to Redfern Train Station in South Eveleigh. Before we get underway with the official proceedings for the event, I do want to take a moment of time to just acknowledge the traditional owners on the land in which we're meeting today. And for me, I'm on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I want to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I'd also like to take this moment to just acknowledge all of the traditional owners of the many lands on which people are joining us today across the nation now known as Australia, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. It's absolutely my greatest pleasure to welcome you today and share in this. I think it's always really exciting to be able to have an opportunity and a moment for reflection around a birthday to celebrate both the past, but also to look forward of what the opportunities of the future are. And I think that's true for an organisation as much as it's true for an individual. So what we're going to do today is we're going to walk you through this report that we've commissioned from AlphaBeta to look at Australia's deep tech future and also share the learnings of the past 20 years of Cicada Innovations. And the bulk of our time is going to be spent diving into that and sharing some of those learnings. But before we get into it, what I'd like to do is share with you a couple of reflections over the past year that I've been here as CEO, and as I've come to look at the history and to actually understand some of the background and how we were founded and some of the success stories we're seeing emerging. And we'll also have time at the end for some questions and Q&A. So during the presentation, if you have any questions that come up, please put them in the Q&A function. We will try and get to them. I can't promise that we'll answer everything, but we will do our best to answer where we can. So a couple of things that I really want to reflect on before we get into the report is a little bit about Cicada Innovations and our history and the rich heritage that we have here. So as I said, you can see behind me that we're located in the old engine shop. The building that we're actually in, the National Innovation Centre, was actually one of the first buildings where the trains were being built in Sydney and the engines were being literally craned down into those engines before they went out into productions onto the rail network. And so we really were the engine shop of what was deep tech at the time for both the city, but also more broadly across the nation. And we continue that proud history today with over 40 companies in our space in biotech, medtech, health, agriculture, food, energy, artificial intelligence. We've got people in here working in hardware as well, employing about 450 professionals, largely in the STEM disciplines, and creating both new futures and new economic opportunities in the solutions that they're bringing to market through science and engineering problems that they're solving through science and engineering solutions that they've designed. But it really is the future that's being built in this beautiful old heritage building. And I think it's really exciting to look back on where we've been over the past 20 years and actually think about where the opportunities are for us to go forward. So there's three things that I think this report has kind of really spoken to me about and sort of emerged as we've gone through this journey of digging through our data and looking at our history that I think really are truths that we need to be taking forward, both as an organisation, but also more broadly in our ecosystem, in the tech ecosystem, and nationally as a community as well. And I think these truths are never more serious and more critical to us than what they are now as we face this really difficult economic situation as a result of COVID-19 and really have the moment to pause and reflect about what the opportunity is for the future. So the first of those learnings is around vision. And I think it takes, whenever you're looking at solving really big problems or whether you're thinking about the future, problems are just obstacles that have a creative opportunity for solution. But it takes somebody with vision and it takes people with vision to come together to actually lead those things to come to pass. So Cicada Innovations, we weren't modelled on Silicon Valley, we weren't modelled on Israel, we weren't modelled on any other ecosystem that you'll hear mentioned today and every day in the media. We're actually modelled on the University Science City Centre in Philadelphia. And what we were modelled on is this vision that they had there, which is a shared vision that we still have today, is to be this collaboration and this melting pot between industry, between academia, researchers, practitioners, clinicians, the general public, venture capitalists and funders, to solve the really big problems of the world through science and engineering, and to come together as an ecosystem, not as one entity, but as an ecosystem, to bring those products and solutions to market. And that vision takes a lot of commitment and a lot of long time. So I really just want to take a moment to acknowledge both our shareholders, the universities that actually founded us. So the University of Technology, so UTS, University of New South Wales, University of Sydney and ANU. And in particular, I'd actually like to acknowledge somebody that worked really, really, really hard to bring this vision to life and to pull together all these parties, which is Tom Forgan. And Tom actually worked on site when he was trying to bring this vision and bring what is now known as Cicada Innovations to life. He actually worked on site in a railway carriage for 3 years that he had his family help him refurbish, to bring people here to a space and a place that wasn't functioning as it is today, and casting vision and walking them around empty sheds and empty lots, and speaking about what the future of Australia could look like if we could bring people together. And I think it's just as important, that vision and the way that he was articulating it then is just as true then as it is today, and if not more so. And we've seen a real sort of challenge and opportunity, I think, for us as a nation to really look to science and engineering to help us solve some of the pressing problems that we've faced over this past year in particular. And so I'm really excited that keeping that vision and bringing people to that vision and making that a collective vision that we can all share in is something that we need to take forward. I think the second thing that struck me as really important is about longevity. We're 20 years old. 20 years old. Actually on Saturday. Saturday is the day that the papers were signed and we were brought into business. And it takes time to solve really big challenges. I know in this day of, mobile and information being everywhere and always accessible, there's this temptation to look for a quick fix. And there's this temptation, we all want this easy answer. We all want one thing to do that's going to make this astounding difference. And the reality is actually, if we want to make this economic transformation that we need as a nation, we actually need to stay the course, and we need to align policy and practices in business. We need to align the work that we're doing in research and development, and we need to come together as a community, and we need to gather together and stay the course for a really long time. You're going to see this in the report, but when we think about some of the fundamentally amazing technologies that have emerged from Australia, and I think about Wi-Fi and Cochlear and ResMed, all of those things took 30 to 40 years to bring those research and development and those technologies to market. And they're real fundamental enablers for other things to be built on top of it. So when we think about the longevity and being an overnight success, we actually really need to unpack that a little bit further and understand how each part of our ecosystem can work together to bring that transformative change. And if we think about 40 years to be those overnight successes, well, we're only halfway on that journey, and we've got some great results so far, but a lot more to share with you, I think, in the coming years. And I think the third thing that for me that really struck me as we went on this journey is the conversation that we need to have as a nation. And I'm framing this in the way as that there is value being created beyond valuation. And I think it's a really interesting time. This week, is earnings week for most of the large companies across Australia, and they're reporting back on earnings. And that is the measure of success that we're saying we should judge an organisation by and a company by. But actually, when we talk about the value that's created, and it's created with the companies that have come through Cicada Innovations and that are emerging from Cicada Innovations today and that are just starting out, it's actually far more beyond the valuation of that company. There's a significant impact and a flow onto the economy from the jobs that are created, from the payroll tax in those states, from the people here that then go on to found other companies and other opportunities, for the supply chains that are actually created around these technologies. And even more than that, there's benefits that we need to be looking at and we need to be measuring, especially when we're thinking about businesses investing in this space, or we're thinking about government policy. We need to think about what's the value creation for the community as well. And I want to just give you one example that is in our report, which we will share with you today. But one of the examples in there is how else is a company's adding value to people. And so Loop Plus, one of our residents here, they work in health and diagnostics tools for people in wheelchairs to help them monitor their health and well-being and to stay healthy and well. And they not only create economic benefit for their company, for their employees, for the people and their customers who use their products and services, but there's actually a flow-on effect and a really big impact on the healthcare system. So if they can actually alleviate and help people in wheelchairs stay out of the hospital system to manage their health and well-being really well and to not have things like pressure sores, that's potentially a $2 billion a year saving to the healthcare system. So when we start thinking about the impact and what it means for deep tech to be successful in Australia and what it means for our economy, let's think a little bit more beyond valuation alone, because actually when we think about it holistically, it gets to be a really exciting value proposition about why we should go forward. Well, I think that's enough from me right now. What I'd love to do is I want to turn over to Toby and to Jim from AlphaBeta, who are going to walk us through a presentation and talk through quite a bit of what they've learned and what they've seen and what you're going to be able to see in the report that you can download after this presentation today. So over to you, Toby and Jim.
Great. Thank you so much, Sally, and thank you for that introduction. My name's Toby Brennan. I'm from AlphaBeta Australia, and I'm here with my colleague Jim Minifee, and thrilled to have the opportunity to share with you some of the work that we've been doing. For those of you who don't know AlphaBeta Australia, we're a consulting firm. We bring together economics, strategy, and data to solve complex problems. Since February this year, we've been part of Accenture. We've worked extensively on innovation in Australia over the last 5 years. We've been really lucky to work with Innovation Science Australia. We've done work with Data 61 on digital innovation opportunities for Australia. We've advised state governments and federal governments on innovation policy, and also worked with major corporates on their innovation and R&D strategies. But we were especially excited to have the opportunity this year to work with Cicada in its 20th anniversary year, to really dig into and understand what the role of incubation is in the innovation ecosystem. As Sally said, I think often in innovation, the story we talk about when we talk about value is potential. We talk about IPOs and trade sales, which are proxies for the potential future value that an innovation or a startup might generate. And that's important, that's relevant. But what we really wanted to do in this report is dig into the value that is already being created by Cicada's innovators across not just value for themselves, but value for their employees, value for their customers, for consumers more generally, but also for society as a whole. So I think the valuation approach that we're going to share with you today, I think will hopefully demonstrate how much value has already been created and how widely distributed the value from innovation can be as well. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what is deep tech and why it matters, and what we see the role of incubators as being in deep tech. And then I'm going to hand over to Jim, who's going to talk specifically about this question of value and the detailed analysis we've done of the value that some of Cicada's businesses have generated over the last 20 years. And what lessons that holds for the future role of deep tech in Australia's innovation system. Thanks, Jim. So what is deep tech, and how is it different from shallow tech? So deep tech is unique, proprietary, or hard to reproduce technological innovation. But it has three key features that I think are really important to understand. The first is the potential for really significant impact on difficult problems at a global scale. The second is long incubation periods. To produce these unique proprietary innovations takes extensive R&D and commercialization, and a lot of testing before innovation is market ready. And the third feature, which is a product of that long incubation, is it does require significant investment. To get to market over a decade or more often requires sustained patient capital that supports and understands how deep tech innovation works. So let's dig into a little bit around each of these three features, because I'd love to explain them to you more. So firstly, around the impact. Thanks, Jim. Next slide. Now, Jim's going to talk a little bit about the economic impact, but as Sally said, one of the things we also wanted to focus on in this work is the social and environmental impact that deep tech startups are able to generate. So we looked across the Sustainable Development Goals, which is as good a guide to the major social and environmental and economic challenges that we face as a world over the next decade. And it was striking just how many of the startups that are being incubated at Cicada are working on challenges that are incredibly relevant to the SDGs. Gelion, for example, producing cheaper, safer and more sustainable alternatives to expensive lithium-ion batteries. Improving battery technology, of course, is such a critical part of the energy transition that every country around the world is now facing. There are a lot of startups at Cicada, or who have come out of Cicada in the medtech space, addressing major challenges around health and well-being. Nucleon and Calumino, we've just put there as examples. And similarly in agriculture and ag tech, massive challenges for the world in improving sustainability of food production systems and reducing hunger. And several startups that are working in Cicada are focused on those really important challenges. So I won't go into all these in detail. There are some great case studies in the report that I encourage you to look at. But I think you can see clearly that these are startups that are working on problems that have the potential to have really significant impact socially and environmentally. Thanks, Jim. The second feature of deep tech that I want to focus on is the long timelines for developing these kinds of innovations. We thought a nice way to demonstrate that is by doing case studies of some of Australia's most significant deep tech successes. And we have had some great deep tech successes over the last half century or so. So here we looked at the timelines around polymer banknotes, which of course driven out of CSIRO and then commercialized out of the RBA. CPAP, obviously the technology that's underlied ResMed's success. Wi-Fi, again, significant contributions from CSIRO to the overall development of Wi-Fi. And then the cochlear implant. And across each of them, you see how long it took from initial ideas or diagnosis or prototyping through to just the go-to-market of an initial product. In polymer banknotes, 20 years just to get an initial product in the market. CPAP, a decade. Wi-Fi, around 20 years as well to commercialization. Cochlear, 20 years to commercialization of the nucleus cochlear implant. And then refining and improving the technology after that initial go-to-market, decades and decades beyond that as well. So while shallow tech can get to market in sometimes, 1 to 2 years, deep tech typically takes a decade or more just to get into the market. But the results can be really profound, as you can see as well from these 4 really significant innovations. Thanks, Jim. So thirdly, we require sustained investment in order to successfully bring deep tech to market. And one of the really pleasing things that we observed when we looked at the data of where startup funding is going globally, and that's the chart on the right-hand side of this slide, is how much of that funding has shifted towards deep tech. And I think that demonstrates an increasing understanding and awareness in the capital markets and in the venture capital community of how important and valuable deep tech can be and of the need for that sustained and patient investment. On the left-hand side, you also see an increasing share of startups who are launched globally who are focused on deep tech as well. So I think sustained investment definitely, but also the data shows an increasing understanding, which is pleasing, and a recognition that this type of technological innovation really is the mainspring of economic growth. No other economic input, not education or natural resources, which we have often relied on in Australia, has the potential to drive living standard improvements so enduringly. Thanks, Jim. But Australia has a challenge, and our challenge is that our corporate sector is not well oriented towards long-term R&D investment. So we looked at a data set of the top 2,500 firms globally by R&D investment. And what we see is that Australia is punching well below its weight. So on the far right-hand side, you'll see Australia's share of global GDP, just under 2%, 1.7% of GDP. But our share of firms in that collection of 2,500 global R&D leaders is just 0.5%. So a substantial gap between our share of the economy and our contribution to R&D leadership. Take South Korea, a country with a comparable share of global GDP, 1.9%, but almost 3% of firms in that global R&D leadership group, 6 times as many as ours. The UK, just over 3% of global GDP, over 5% of firms in that global R&D leadership group. So we do not have a corporate sector which is well oriented to nurture and support deep tech, and that is a challenge. So in that context, what role can incubation play to support deep tech in Australia? Thanks, Jim. So we looked at 3 main commercialization models for deep tech. Firstly, there's the standalone deep tech startup. This is a startup that comes to market, that develops its innovation with little support, may have some VC funding and other sources of funding. It's not incubated though. And our view is that that's challenging. Across the inputs that are really required for deep tech commercialization, particularly the route to market, but also sophisticated finance and technical facilities, it is a difficult pathway. Now, it can work for innovations that are less technically demanding or are already far advanced to market, but it's a tough path. Deep tech innovation within a corporate definitely has more appeal. So corporates can provide better access to finance than a standalone deep tech might be able to access. And corporates are also good at providing a route to market for deep tech commercialization. But so there is a fit definitely for that pathway, for that commercialization model. It tends to work best for incremental innovations that are extending that corporation's own core technical capabilities or complementing an existing product line, because that's where the corporate has the best route to market already. But in our view, that the incubated model is the most flexible and best suited to bringing complex step-out innovations to market. It provides access to sophisticated finance, high-quality business services, technical facilities, as Sally said, incredible facilities there at Cicada in Redfern, including clean rooms and very high-tech equipment, as well as a route to market. So across those range of key inputs that are critical for deep tech commercialization, we do see that incubation provides probably the broadest range of access. Thanks, Jim. I really like this slide because what it demonstrates clearly is that incubators are not outside of an innovation ecosystem. In fact, what makes incubators powerful, in our view, is their ability to gather and integrate resources from across the ecosystem. And that includes both kind of university, technical, commercial resources, and bring them together and make those resources accessible to the startups that operate within the incubator. And Cicada, looking at its history, has been incredibly lucky to have access to a great range of ecosystem resources that it can bring together. It has great relationships across its university shareholders, UNSW, UTS, ANU, and Sydney University. It has connections into CSIRO. It has close links with the venture capital community, such as Main Sequence Ventures. It has an incredible network of alumni over its 20 years of operations as well, which provide another ecosystem resource that it can connect its current startups with. So it's by integrating those ecosystem resources and making them accessible to startups that Cicada really boosts the performance of startups. Thanks, Jim. And what is the evidence for that? What is the evidence for how effective incubators are at supporting startups? And I think we have to acknowledge that it can be challenging to measure this because there is a selection problem. Incubators identify and select high potential startups. So we would expect that the startups that come out of incubators have a better survival and growth rate as a result as well. However, the academic evidence, I think, shows that that outperformance outweighs the selection. And this slide, we've just summarized, and in the report in more detail, some of the literature on the role that incubators can play in both boosting startup survival and accelerating startup growth. And I think the evidence is quite conclusive. And this is a evidence base that I think governments and scientific communities are increasingly understanding as well. And here are just a few examples of major deep tech incubators and science parks that have been established in Europe and North America, and then increasingly in our own region. Sally made reference to Philadelphia Science City, which you can see there, incredibly long history all the way back to 1963. So a really market leading idea to develop. But what you'll notice is in our region, apart from Cicada, Singapore and New Zealand are both recognised as well the importance of deep tech incubation to their innovation systems. Singapore, for instance, the Singaporean government has established SG Innovate in 2016, which is focused on deep tech. And that's helped startups raise more than $500 million in just 5 years. So we are seeing governments recognising how critical incubation is to their innovation systems. I'm going to hand over to Jim, who's going to talk a little bit more about Cicada and what value it has generated in its 20 years. Jim.
Thanks, Toby. And as Sally mentioned right at the start, that for us, the distinguishing feature of deep tech is that it's just so key to addressing the significant challenges that we face as a society. And the slide that I've put up on the screen now just captures 4 challenges. The values here are Australian values, and we've pulled those out in part because these are challenges that startups that have incubated or are incubating at Cicada Innovations are currently attacking them. And you can see the first one is agricultural output and sustainability. Now, there's a huge yield loss associated with the inefficient use of water, fertilizer, and other inputs. And Fluorosat, a startup that has incubated at Cicada Innovations, is developing software that enables precision farming at scale. And if the yield shortfall could be corrected, the value in Australia would be over $7 billion. And part of that is this kind of precision use of inputs. The next opportunity is last mile delivery, which is a known bottleneck around logistics, and drone delivery can play an important role, potentially worth up to $3 billion in Australia alone at overcoming that bottleneck. Rechargeable batteries, a huge part of Australia's renewable and low carbon energy future, and finding safe, low cost alternatives to lithium ion battery systems is probably worth $2.2 billion in the market today, and potentially much, much more as that opportunity grows in the coming decade. Sally also mentioned Loop Plus, which is working to roll out its innovative solution to help wheelchair users manage and avoid pressure injuries. And that one injury alone if we could manage that better, could create over $2 billion a year in Australia. So that's just some very concrete examples of the type of value that can be created by deep tech. And what we did in this report is to measure value that has already been created. And again, just using a sample of startups that have incubated at Cicada Innovations for the purposes of this exercise. And as Toby mentioned, startups themselves do capture some of the benefit. They generate revenue in excess of costs, and that's a component of the total value that's created by the deep tech startup. But their direct customers get additional value. They're buying a new innovative input that helps them get a lead on their competitors and build their own scale and so forth. And what we found was that the business benefits are actually larger than the benefits to the startups themselves. And in turn, consumers who are driving additional benefits based on the additional functionality that their suppliers are able to give them, again, adds to the total benefits. And something that really surprised us, I think, in this analysis is that the societal benefit, which is to say, in excess of what the startup operators and employees, the direct customers and the consumers of those customers capture, is actually the largest benefit of the lot. And the type of benefits that fall into this category include, for example, benefits through the tax system when you get a better functioning healthcare system. So at the moment, we provide about 9% of GDP goes into the healthcare system. Significant chunk of that is effectively publicly funded. And so boosting the functionality of that segment has benefits that are in addition to the direct benefits of the businesses and consumers that are using those services. Another really significant benefit component is around unpriced environmental benefits. So for example, where water or atmospheric pollution is not priced, then reducing those things creates an additional benefit above and beyond the benefit that accrues to the direct customers of the deep tech. And so just for the 6 sample deep tech startups that have incubated at Cicada over the last 13 or 14 years, our estimate of total benefit approaches $400 million. And a really striking feature of that total value, which is in line with the slide you showed before, Toby, around just how long it takes deep tech to begin to be commercialized, is shown on the slide that I've got up on the screen now. So what you see here is a timeline from 2008 through to 2019. We've got the period, the year in which each of the deep tech startups commenced incubation, and then the green bars are the value that's created by the sum of those 6 startups. And you can see that almost 80% of the value was created since 2017. So this is for startups that commenced as far back ago as financial year 2008. And so it's not a hockey stick, but it's exponential growth, and that's characteristic of emergent technologies. And so when you project this forward, there's reason to hope that some of the huge value creation we've seen from some of Australia's deep tech giants could be replicated in the domains that these deep tech firms are operating in. And that's all concrete on the ground value, but it's not to discount the more prospective value that's recognized in trade sales and IPOs. And the current chart just sets out the value. You can see right in the middle of the chart, $625 million in trade sale and IPO value from just the startups which have made publicly available their transaction values, and their additional startups that haven't divulged that value. And the benefit of that, of course, accrues in a direct sense back to the founders, employees, investors, including universities. And that's a genuine financial return reflecting market opinion about the future value that's going to be created to the owners of these businesses. But there's a kind of a flywheel or a positive feedback effect that occurs once the universities that have made these investments, the investors, including super funds, and the founders and employees are then in a position to invest back into the innovation ecosystem in Australia. And you're beginning to see in recent years, as our deep tech investment pools gain scale, that these sort of positive feedbacks are becoming material. And so while it is more prospective, it's still a very real component of the way in which deep tech is adding value for Australia. And so again, for us, just as a process to go through estimating the value that's being created and returned into the ecosystem, we were really encouraged to see that Cicada Innovations family of firms is generating genuine value. And there's more detail in the report about how we did that work and the firms that have created it. But I now just want to shift gear before we open up into discussion to touch on some of the reflections that we felt were worth sharing about what Australia can do to really capitalise on our deep tech strengths and make sure that we're getting maximum value. And again, it's not just financial value, it's about addressing head-on some of the challenges that we face from commercialising deep tech. And the chart that I put up on the screen now just summarises what we see as 4 big priority areas that the Australian deep tech community and our policymaking community ought to be really focused on to make sure that we can derive the value that deep tech offers. So the first is, and I'll go through these in a little more detail in a moment, just to build a bridge through our current pandemic crisis. The second is to make sure we're broadly across the value that deep tech can offer to us, and make sure that that turns into a shared vision that broadly is accepted and supported across Australia. And the third is to change how we think about innovation inside our organisations, and to make sure that when we think about innovation, we're not just thinking shallowly about the next marketplace, valuable though that may be, but we're thinking really hard about the more ambitious agenda around getting value from applying deeper technologies. And the fourth area is around making sure that we've got the concrete programs to put the dollars behind deep tech to make sure that we can realise the opportunity. And so each of these in the report we flesh out in some more detail, but it's even what we put in the report is just a contribution to what we hope is going to be a growing discussion around what we need to do to create value from deep tech for Australia. So first, we are quite concerned about whether deep tech is getting the priority that it ought to be getting through the crisis. So there's been a lot of reporting about some of the challenges the university sector is facing, and while the government has taken some steps, when you look globally, you see opportunities being captured. For example, in the UK, has constructed a future fund that matches private investments in startups that have previously raised Series A dollars to make sure that they're not falling into a funding pit due to disruptions thanks to the virus. Other options might be to bring forward research and development tax incentive cash flow relief to firms that are facing challenges due to disruption from the virus. The second around the vision, again, as I mentioned, just changing our understanding of what innovation means inside our organisations, and just recognising that we do have an opportunity to do much better on this dimension. If Australia were to double our private R&D, we'd be at the same level as the US. If we were to double our venture capital as a share of R&D, we'd hit the OECD average only. And if we quintupled our patent applications, we'd be at about Germany's level. And so I don't think we should think that it's the right time to be resting on our laurels. There's a lot of opportunity for us to recognise that there's more that we can do. And then finally, let me just jump to investment for the long term, because I'm aware of time. Australia does have a set of policy settings and initiatives like the R&D tax incentive, and then some specific funds like the Biomedical Translation Fund, which are really adding value. CSIRO has got an innovation fund which combines CSIRO, private and government funding to invest in deep tech ventures. But there's so much more that can be done. New South Wales Medical Devices Fund, another great model, but we don't in this country have anything like the scale of really targeted public and private investment in R&D that you'd want to see in a high functioning deep tech focused ecosystem. So there's a lot of opportunity to build along those dimensions, and as part of that, to think through really carefully what it's going to take to scale and to make sure that we've got really focused expansion of our deep tech startup incubation as well. If there's one big insight for me out of this report, it is that startup incubation is an important part of deep tech commercialization. So look, these are more in the nature of agenda starting discussions, and really look forward to continuing it with you right now. So if I'm going to hand back to you, Sally.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. And thank you so much for that, Toby, as well. We are going to go into Q&A in a moment, and I see there's some really good questions coming through the Q&A function. So not in the chat, thanks, in the Q&A function, if for those of you who are watching. But as I give you a chance to pop those in and to vote those up in the short time that we have, I wanted to invite 2 additional people to join us here, because I think it's really great to also get the perspectives of a couple of the people in the ecosystem. You know, that was mentioned both throughout the presentation, that there's no one magic thing that we can do to make, you know, deep tech the foundation and a really strong foundation of our economy. It's actually multiple things that we need to do and multiple stakeholders. So I want to just ask the team to let in right now Elisa Mokany, who is a co-founder of SpeedX, one of our residents here, and also Mike Zimmerman, who is one of the partners of Main Sequence Ventures, which is the fund backed by CSIRO, just to be able to answer some questions, but also to give you a little bit of flavour. I think it's always really useful to hear from people who are part of our ecosystem, who are part of our family and our people that we work with, our colleagues on a day-to-day basis, about their journey. So Lisa, I might start with you first. I think there's actually something really interesting about what SpeedX does, and also how you came into being and your long-term journey, that is kind of reflective and in some ways it parallels to the challenging circumstances that we're seeing you know, in society right now. Could you share a little bit about that, what you do and how you got here with us now?
Great. Thank you, Sally. So SpeedX is a molecular diagnostic company, and we're focused on providing innovative solutions to unmet medical needs, such as antimicrobial resistance. SpeedX was the result of actually another economic downturn back in 2008, where the GFC caused our Sydney division of Johnson & Johnson to close. This gave us the opportunity to start our own company. Like then, I think now is a really good time to be supporting and funding new innovation. Now, SpeedX was founded on proprietary DNA technology. Our initial business model was a licensing structure where we continued developing and innovating new technologies to address the needs of the time. And we saw the power of our technology financially benefiting others. This led us to pivot in 2014 to make our own products. We've now transitioned from startup to scale up, manufacturing products here at Cicada with 92 staff worldwide and offices in Texas and London. Cicada have been instrumental in all phases of our growth. Their knowledge and experience for grants, fundraising, IP, and legal, just to name a few, have helped us become an overnight success, 11 years in the making. Deep tech truly is a long-term investment, requiring funding and support for it to mature and reach its full potential. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And one of the things I just wanted to mention before I come to Mike and get him to share a little bit of his perspective, because I think it's really valuable and addresses some of the questions coming through around funding. SpeedX, we talk about them a lot, because I think that fundamentally the story and the journey that they have, as both Elisa and Alison, her co-founder, have, is one of people who, out of redundancy and out of challenge and circumstance changing, have actually seen that as an opportunity. And they've actually put their heads down, they've worked really hard, but we've actually seen a resilience come through, not just in that journey over 11 years, but particularly in these last few months, where I've watched the team day by day. They're all in here. Production happens just actually behind me, behind the walls down there where their production facilities are. But they've been coming in day by day, and they've actually been growing that team. And so when I think about what the opportunity for SpeedX is, and what the opportunity is for Australia, it is actually a jobs and growth opportunity, because they're doing that right now in the midst of the pandemic, which a lot of our other companies are doing as well. And I think that's a good segue over to you, Mike, because in the midst of this time, you know, we have a close relationship with a lot of venture funds. We think everybody in Australia is our friend. But in this time, in the pandemic, what's been the most unusual experience for us is we've actually had companies moving into this building. And one of those, you know, yet another company backed by you, actually. You are the partner, the lead on that. So I'd love to just get your reflections on this report, maybe anything that you want to add to the conversation. And then we're going to throw over to the Q&A from everybody. And I know people want to know about is venture capital interested in deep tech in Australia, and what do we need to do to support that as well?
Yeah, good. Well, with that last sentence as the lead-in, I said yes. You know, Main Sequence is very interested in deep tech. For those who don't know us, we are Australia's deep tech fund, and what we do is we back companies that are building new industries that are solving the world's greatest problems. So very, very aligned with Cicada and the missions that were talked about in this report. Importantly, we were established and continue to run with a deep support and partnership with CSRO. And you all may know that CSRO released its own missions last week, also focused on how Australia can help solve the world's greatest problems. So here everything seems to be lining up despite the the crisis that we're sitting in. What's quite interesting, I guess, reflecting, is that it does take a community coming together to build great deep tech companies. So in our case, we have the partnership with CSRO, and yet in our fund, right alongside the CSRO and the federal government as investors, are institutions like Host Plus, Temasek, corporates, even down to individuals who are all aligned in the mission and the promise of deep tech. So that's one example of community working together. And I might just say, we're very long on Cicada. I myself have 3 portfolio companies here. I've been coming here since it was ATP. I attended the On Accelerator there. I worked with Propeller Aero there. And then 3 of our companies, Fluoresat, Lumachain, and Prescient, are all lucky enough to be resident in Cicada and getting great value out of being part of that community. Look, deep tech is harder. It is harder. It takes possibly a bit longer, but the impact is real, and there is a way to improve the world while delivering great returns for investors and shareholders. So that's one, really important message to come out of this as well. We need to continue to work together. This is everyone from the research side, not only CSRO, but of course your great partner universities, incubators like yourself, giving access to facilities, access to capital with firms like ourselves. And then let's not leave off corporate partners and industry partners who are really key in deep tech. And then last but not least, our founders, like the Anastasias, the Jamilas, the Kieran and Nathans of these various companies. Without them and without you, Cicada, the deep tech industry would not be where it is today. So, all gratitude and congratulations to you, and thanks for putting out this report.
Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate that. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge all the people that have actually worked at Cicada over the years. I've only been here just over a year. And as I said, we've said all along, this takes time. And it takes time and people to come alongside an organisation and alongside the companies in it, like SpeedX and others, to support them. So I truly appreciate everybody who's gone before me, everybody who's alongside of us now, and everybody who is going to come alongside of us in the future. I want to jump in the 10 minutes that we have to answer some of these questions, and I'm going to throw to anybody on the panel who would like to answer, particularly Toby and Jim. We've got you, but Alyssa, if you can give us your personal journey as well, because I think it's always great to have a founder perspective in this process as well. The number one question that everybody wants to know is from Kim, and it says, as Toby mentioned, Australia punches lower than its weight in regards to the support of deep tech. Given this and the fact that Australia is known for being risk adverse and unlikely to be a first adopter of new tech, particularly if it was produced here, what is tangibly being done to keep deep tech entrepreneurs onshore to go to market rather than having them leave for shores which get them and support them? So I might jump in first, and I'm gonna throw to Alyssa, because I think you guys have got a great story. I mean, you're here and you're growing here, and you've got the majority of your team here. I would like to say in some things, we've got some really good settings right. Historically, we have had support from government and from industry to support programs like the Medical Devices Fund in New South Wales, through training and opportunities. I think the challenge that we face is that there's an often opportunity to look for the new shiny thing, to the new thing, and a new silver bullet that's going to make make it all good. Well, we've actually got things that have been working under the hood for a good 10, 15, 20 years. And what we need to do is double down the efforts in those and stay the course. That's my perspective. But maybe if I throw over to the panel, Alyssa, I know you've probably got some views on this. You've been so integrated with both federal and local government and things here as well.
Yeah, we've had some interesting experiences. In our early stages, we went for funding in Australia and we were told we were too early. And now a lot of funding in Australia tells us we're too late. But what's actually kept us going has been the government funding. We have worked so closely with New South Wales and federal governments for those grants that have actually got us through from that really pivotal moment where we decided to make our own products. If it wasn't for the government grants, especially the MDF, we would not have been able to make that change. So, I mean, I think in Australia, we really need to think about where, you know, VC funding is going, but also how valuable our government support is and how that helped us so much. And more of that for other startups, I think would be truly valuable.
Yeah, and if we could tie it together. Jim, Toby, do you have reflections? You read through a lot of literature and you did a lot of global work. Were there things that you saw that were maybe missing or either exist in Australia that we should double down our efforts on, or things that you saw overseas that we haven't already spoken about that we should highlight?
Well, just 2 points, Sally. The first, and coming back to the question, is that as Australia gets scale, the balance of what you can do from offshore is changing. So there's just, as you get a local ecosystem with enough depth of sophisticated capital and so on, you're able to just do much more locally. And obviously, if there's one thing the pandemic has taught us, it's that geographic location doesn't matter quite as much as we thought. And you know, Austrade and others are putting in efforts to support tech startups access offshore markets quite, you know, with quite a lot of energy. And then I guess just to me, if I can just, you know, add one perspective that we haven't covered in the report, just as an economist, what really struck us in examining the literature is just that, you know, you don't want to be buying your tech off the shelf. Of course, for a small economy, you do a lot of that, and intrinsically, you're always going to be wanting to exploiting the technology that's developed elsewhere. But a significant fraction of the payoff from technology development does stick in the local area where it's developed through the various routes, whether it's returns to investors or to employees or just to more research depth. And you know, that's a positive feedback loop that we're beginning to build locally. And so the payoff from doubling down on that is going to be even larger in my view than what we've seen to date.
Toby, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I agree with all those comments. I mean, I work a lot in cybersecurity innovation, so I have probably a sense of what the challenges that startups face in that area and what typically sends them overseas. So just to kind of look at the problem from a different perspective. And the two issues that people run up against in innovation in that space is skills and skills pipeline. And that's something we haven't spoken about a lot in this report, but you know, our STEM training system obviously is critical, a critical early stage input to innovation. And the other one is the maturity of capital markets. And it'd be interesting to get Mike's view, particularly once you get into relatively, and Alyssa's view as well, relatively, you know, specialized areas like cybersecurity or med tech. You need VC that not only has money, but that has a pretty deep understanding of the types of problems. And you know, the experience certainly in cyber is that there are more specialized capital markets in larger markets like the US and sometimes in Europe. So that can be a challenge. So I think finding areas where we do want to develop depth and developing some maturity and depth in capital markets in those areas, I think will also help. And then obviously, you know, government policy plays a really significant role in the skills pipeline as well.
Yeah, on the capital side, I think, I mean, I've been kind of around the capital markets for startups for almost 20 years now. And I have to say it is dramatically improved access to capital, and particularly in deep tech, because they're, you know, in certain sectors like in ag, in heavy industries, in quantum, kind of starting to be the case very much in space. Australia actually has a reputation overseas. People understand that there's high quality solutions here, and that kind of the industry side, the corporates are actually innovating in those areas. So, and then the other thing that's gone on, of course, is it's become much more competitive to find good deals in these home markets. In China, in the US, and other places, people are starved for good opportunities where there's less competition. So we found it, you know, frankly, much easier to get people to invest in, you know, the cyberspace. One of our companies just closed a deal led by a US specialist, and certainly a number of our ag companies have overseas investors in them, because they kind of recognize the expertise and they're looking around for good opportunities, and they'll go to where the good deals are. So I'm kind of more bullish than ever on that front.
I want to get to another question on here from somebody, because I think it gets to a heart of a conversation that we need to have in Australia about what kind of companies do we have in this country and what is the underpinning of our economy. And I think there's a lot of conversations out there about how we need to be transformed, and we've relied on some industries for way too long, and we've seen the really big challenges emerge in the midst of COVID, of those that have been resilient and those that haven't, for lots of reasons. But there's a great question from anonymous attendee. I mean, everybody wants that name, saying, if you say the future of our economy is dependent on building more global R&D companies, what needs to change now to ensure we achieve this vision? And I'm just going to throw it out there that everybody on this call probably has a slightly different answer to what that needs to be. What we might need to do a quick rip around the room of what just one thing that you think needs to change so that we get more R&D companies that are truly become global R&D powerhouses, headquartered here in Australia, hopefully started here in Australia. Toby, I'm throwing to you.
Yeah, look, yeah, it's a cool. I would start actually just by challenging the premise a little bit. I don't think we're not quite saying in our report, certainly, that we definitely need more global R&D companies. I think the point that we're making is that we don't have a lot of global R&D companies, and given the absence of global R&D companies that can help commercialize innovation, incubators have an even more critical role to play in our ecosystem. So I think that's, first of all, the point we're making in the report is actually really about what the lack of those companies says about the importance of incubation in filling some of that gap. Now, as to the question of, do we need more global R&D companies? Yes, I think we do, absolutely. But as Jim would say, the mix of R&D we have in our economy is driven very significantly by the mix of the economy itself and the distribution of Australian industry. And I might flick to Jim to talk about that, because I do think it is, much as we would like to improve the R&D performance of our corporates, it is strongly linked to some fundamentals around the makeup of the economy. Jim, do you want to talk about that? You're an expert on that topic.
Yeah, Toby, that's right. And you're citing work that we did with Innovation and Science Australia that showed that if you want to use our industry structure to explain our R&D gap with the rest of the world, it does a very good job. But I would tend to flip that around and say that our industry structure in part reflects our failure to build a really strong research commercialization pipeline. So it's very much a chicken and egg question. And it's true that, we're really strong in finance and resources, and that's been great. I think all of us know that certain parts of our resource industry are under pressure just due to climate change related concerns. And so it's the essence of a high functioning society to plan ahead and to think about our portfolio in a sophisticated fashion. And so to me, I just tie together another question that we've got here, which is, have we got the balance right as a policy, at a policy level, between the R&D tax incentive versus more direct forms of innovation support? And again, Innovation and Science Australia's report around 2030 from a couple of years back raised that question. And to my mind, the CSIRO's Innovation Fund and some of these other more direct funds that we've seen being developed looks like a positive shift. It's not that the R&D tax incentive is the wrong vehicle, but we are more reliant on that than many other advanced economies. And I just think being more sophisticated about getting the most out of our research capability is going to be key to developing those corporate giants, corporate R&D giants of the future.
Mike, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I'll pick up where we left off there. So we spend a chunk of our time, I guess, ferreting around, to use the, I guess, COVID-centric word, given Sarah's doing a bunch of testing on ferrets for vaccines, but ferreting around in the halls of our great research institutions like CSIRO and the universities. And honestly, it's inspiring what's being done in there. And I think your point is spot on. It's how do we get the research out and have impact in it? And I would just encourage any founder that's listening to take the opportunity to either through us or Cicada or other places, is get access to that research. The scientists can't necessarily do it all on their own. They need to partner with founders. And then the other, so one is get the research out. And then the second thing is industry, established industry as partnerships for helping prototype, provide customer requirements, get access to market, potentially strategic funding or co-development funding. I think that's the other piece as well. That's how you build an industry, is having corporates and startups working together.
Alyssa?
Well, as an R&D company that is actually global, and we have been doing it on our own, and we have had support. I think right now I'm feeling a good momentum in New South Wales and in Australia for building our scale-up companies here in Australia and not taking it offshore. But I feel to really understand the global market, obviously big ones are US and Europe, there needs to be probably more support, guidance. I'm not sure what it is. We've had to pave our own way, and we've got a lot of challenges with taking on the US. So I think thinking about the support networks for those scale-up companies going global, and how Australia can better make sure that we stay in Australia and not end up offshore, so we can take on those bigger markets. And I think obviously this is a whole panel discussion in itself, and I don't have answers, but I mean, we're on that pathway, and so really looking for support in any way we can to help us be successful on that road.
Thank you. I think you've actually encapsulated where I kind of want to wrap us up today, because we are at time, and I want to be respectful of the fact that everybody has given us so much time today to join in this conversation, and it is the start of a conversation. I think Toby and Jim sort of said that early. This is the start of a conversation that has been going on for a while. It is one that we're hoping that this report will be an input to continue the conversation. But I would ask everybody out there who sees this video, who's watching live, who will watch the video once it's up on YouTube, to not actually just take this in and not to just consume it, but to actually engage in it and get involved. Because the reality is exactly what Alyssa just talked about, is that we need to come together collectively. There is no one answer. We love CSIRO, we love our universities, government is great, VCs are awesome, that's fantastic, but not one of them on their own is actually going to get us to where we need to be. And so creating those links and creating those tangible connections, coming together collectively, being a really true community that lifts alongside of each other on this journey is something that we're really passionate about, and it's really at the core of who we are and in our DNA and the vision of why we've created. So I would invite you all to sort of, as you've watched this today, as you take home and reflect on the report, which is available on our website now, and you'll get a message after this to be able to download it, to think about what it is that you want to do and find a way to connect in with all of us, because we do think that this is a really good opportunity to completely transform outcomes for not just ourselves and those of us that are here today, but for the generations to come, in solving really big problems through science and technology and bringing those solutions to market and doing it from Australia. I just want to thank you all for joining us today. To Alyssa and to Mike, thank you for joining us on the panel. To Jim and to Toby in particular, thank you for the really long journey that we've been on. It's actually been fantastic to work with you, and we've had a lot of fun along the way, unpacking what's a really complex topic. And I think every time you've asked me a question, why? What do you mean by that? What is deep tech anyway? It's been actually a really good conversation to have in both directions. And so I just want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for the work that you've done in putting this report together. And for all of you watching today, thank you so much. Please go online and download a copy of the report and follow us on our newsletter and engage with us. We want to continue the conversation, and more importantly, we want to create a partnership with you to help fulfill the mission that we have, which is growing deep tech companies here in Australia. Thanks. Bye.